My journey began 8 years ago when, as a very passionate and very naive 13-year-old, I launched a campaign, a grassroots online campaign against unsustainable palm oil production, which surprisingly is still the most viewed site on palm oil in the world, which I can't get my head around. But I soon went on to become involved with a wide spectrum of different social change projects and quickly realised that there are many pressing issues in our society. In 2012, while travelling through the Bornean jungle for a conservation program with an Indigenous community, I saw a logging site for the first time, which was a field of barren emptiness, robbed of all its biodiversity. In 2013, I found myself in Samoa reporting at a World Health Organization summit on non-communicable diseases in the Pacific. And I was shocked to see the influence of the Western diet in a place as remote as Samoa, which has a population similar to Geelong, and where diet-related chronic diseases are rapidly rising. In 2014, I encountered quite the opposite while in Cambodia directing a film crew for a poverty alleviation campaign. I met people who were faced with the problem of food scarcity, families having to make decisions between feeding their children or sending them to school. In 2015, I found myself in Greenland, of all places, in the Arctic Circle, standing on this ice glacier, kilometres wide, with climate scientist Jason Box. And as I stared up into the sky at this 8-metre tall pole that Jason was holding, he said, "This is how much the glacier has melted in the last 6 to 12 months. Over 120 billion litres of water from that single glacier alone." Then, in 2016, I came face to face with the true horrors of intensive animal agriculture right here in our own backyard, or working for Animals Australia. A system built on senseless exploitation where animals like pigs, who are said to have 3 times the intellectual development as a dog, are put in crates barely wider than their own bodies for most of their lives and are slaughtered using a process that includes gassing in underground chambers. I came to learn that in many instances, these problems are interconnected, and that there was one cause in particular that was and is fueling every issue that I had worked to address, which is the large-scale production and consumption of meat. Let me take a moment to explain, and it's not a particularly cheery reality. So we breed 70 billion land animals a year for food production, the vast majority in intensive farms where cruelty has literally been legalised and commercialised. Because the vast majority of those animals are confined in factories and feedlots, they require fodder. This results in 1/3 of the world's cereal harvest being funneled into livestock production, so that a family in Australia or America can enjoy a kilogram of cheap meat that required anywhere from 2 to 20 kilograms of feed to produce. And this highly inefficient form of food production drives up the cost for grain in countries where it's a key source of sustenance for those living in poverty. Growing this feed and grazing livestock requires an awful lot of space. 30% of the world's entire non-ice land surface, to be exact, which leads to deforestation. This makes animal agriculture the world leader in the clearing of forests and in species extinction. And according to the UN, one of the most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale, from local to global. Arguably, the most concerning of those problems is climate change. Growing animals for food and their feed contributes more to greenhouse gases than the entire world's transportation sector, including 37% of all human-induced methane. And then there's the consumption of the end product, which leading health authorities like the World Health Organization have linked to the most major chronic diseases plaguing our society, including heart disease, diabetes and cancer, not to mention public health crises like antibiotic resistance and foodborne illness outbreaks. Meat is clearly a big problem. And considering that within the next 30 years, food production is estimated to have to increase at least 70% in order to feed the world, it would be catastrophic and frankly impossible to feed the world using livestock. Does this mean we must stop producing meat? Or could we completely change the way that we're producing it? Well, last year I met with groups of scientists and entrepreneurs overseas who are doing exactly that. Creating burgers and meatballs and fillets without the cows and chickens and fish. Here are two examples. This is the Impossible Burger, made entirely from plants, but designed to offer the same experience as a conventional ground meat product. Its ingredients include protein from potato, wheat, and spinach, along with coconut fat and plant-based heme, which gives it that bloody, juicy element. And this is the Memphis Meats Clean Meatball, made from real cow cells, which are fed oxygen, vitamins, sugar, and water, all the same inputs that a cow would typically have, but without wasting the majority of those resources and causing environmental damage in that process. So there are two main approaches that companies are taking to recreate meat at the molecular level, either by carefully selecting plant proteins, including ones that haven't been used for food production before, because we haven't looked at the majority of the plant kingdom for protein, and combining and heating them in a way that replicates the taste and texture of animal-based meat. It uses 95% less land, 74% less water, and 84% less greenhouse gas emissions, and eliminates hormones, antibiotics, and foodborne illnesses like salmonella, and can be nutritionally superior. For example, the Beyond Burger has more iron and protein than steak, more omegas than salmon, and more calcium than milk. A handful of these products are currently available in the USA, and companies like Impossible Foods will be producing 1 million pounds of product monthly, starting later this year. And my new organisation, Food Frontier, is working to get more of these innovations to Australia very soon. The second method, clean or cultured meat, is basically growing a tiny sample of real animal cells in a mineral culture until they regenerate, which takes about 14 to 21 days in what is essentially a steel tank. 99% less land, 96% less water, and 90% less greenhouse gases. And it gets its name because, again, hormones, antibiotics, and salmonella go out the window. So it's literally clean, slaughter-free animal flesh. And there's potential to adjust the nutrient profile as well to include more desirable nutrients and less nasty ones. Clean meat is expected to be about 1 to 3 years off commercialisation. And clean milk, which, you guessed it, involves taking milk cells and brewing them like you would beer, is about 12 months off being on the market in the States. From my 8 years working across a range of projects, I have never seen before a movement with as much potential to create extensive, transformative, positive change for humanity. It is bloody exciting. And in the States, there's literally labs of scientists with thousands of plant species that they're testing for new proteins and elements, and scientists trialling the most effective ways of culturing animal cells. Groups of Michelin star chefs and restaurants are championing these new innovations, and the space has received backing from the likes of Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Sergey Brin, and Li Ka-shing, the richest person in Asia. Not to mention some of the biggest meat producers in the world, including Tyson Foods and Cargill. Eric Schmidt, the executive chairman of Google's parent company Alphabet, named the consumption of plant-based proteins in place of conventional meat his pick as the #1 game-changing trend of the future. There's no doubt this is the future of meat production, at least a significant portion of it. So the question isn't whether this shift will occur, the question is how soon can we get there, because we cannot afford to wait. And that's why I started Food Frontier, which is a DGR-endorsed nonprofit working with players along the food chain, from development to manufacturing to sales, and supporting industry and government in our region to champion these new, healthier, greener food innovations. Because there's enormous potential for Australia to become one of the leading countries in this space, and it begins with diversifying our already strong meat sector, domestically and abroad. Because let's be honest, people currently eat meat not because of how it's produced. In fact, they often eat it in spite of how it's produced. We don't want to think about the processes. People eat meat because it tastes good, because it's readily available, it's affordable, and it's what we're familiar with as a choice that we inherited from our parents. And so considering we can now enjoy a juicy burger without harming others, ourselves, or the world, my question to you today is, will you join me in embracing this as the future of food? Thank you.